Hello, and welcome to the Public Square, a show that explores public affairs and religious liberty issues that affect our nation and beyond. I'm your host, Paul Goodridge, and I serve as the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director for the South Central Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. Each show, we'll talk to individuals who are on the front lines of the fight for civil and religious liberty. My goal is to inform about issues that directly and indirectly have an impact on everyday life, ignite meaningful thought and reflection, integrate faith principles in how we relate to others, and inspire people to action. So, thanks for joining us, and let's meet in the public square. My guest today is Jerry Burnet. He has been a member of the NAACP for 20 years. He served as third vice president of the Alabama State Conference of NAACP. He has served as a political action committee chair for the Alabama State Conference of the NAACP. And currently he serves as president of the Huntsville-Madison County branch of the NAACP for the past 2 years. Jerry, welcome to the Public Square, and thank you for joining us.
All right. Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, so today we're going to deal with the voter registration and the importance of voting. And so let me just ask you, begin. Tell us, what is voting? What is voter registration? What is that all about?
Voting registrations is where the community will come together and elect a candidate to represent them in their government.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to cast a vote, you have to be first registered to vote. And there's a qualification. Anyone can, 18 or older, that's a U.S. citizen, who have not been convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude can register and vote.
Mm-hmm.
If they're going to be 18 at the election, they can vote early. I mean, they can register early. They can register at the age of 17, providing that they will be 18 on election day.
Okay. So now, is this just about voting for the President of the United States in terms of the general election, or are there other elections that one should be concerned about?
Oh yeah, there's a midterm election, and there's your local elections where you elect your local city and county leaders. And also, because that's not on the same date as the general election, depending on what state or city you're in. Your local elections may be in the summer,
Mm-hmm.
whereas your presidential election is every 4 years in November. And of course, we have a midterm election where we elect our U.S. congressmen they only serve for 2 years. That's why you have their election is every 2 years. And of course, we elect our senators also doing every 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
But that election is always take place in November also.
Okay. So, all right. So you gave us an idea of what voting is. How did it start? Tell us something about the history of voting in the United States.
Well, there was a time when when we didn't vote, you had no say-so as to how the government would run, but it turned out that it worked best when everybody living in the community have some say-so as to who be elected to represent them. And if you look back at the history of it, particularly for Black Americans, it's been an up and down situation from coming out of slavery. Black people was given the privilege of voting in the 1865, but then through the gerrymandering and the violence and for some reason or another, the vote was taken away from Black people.
Mm-hmm.
And then from the 1860s down to about 1901, when it had a full impact, the voter suppression, where it was only about like 5% of the Black people in the South was voting in the early 1900s. And then the struggle continued until around about 1965, which was quite a few years to where we got a Voting Rights Act passed, and that allowed us to get back into the electoral process. So, and from the 65 up until 2010, that worked pretty good. And then, but close to 2010, there was another struggle over whether Black people should have the right to vote. So as a result, a number of congressmen and senators got together and they passed a bill in 2010 and struck down the part of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which required states to get pre-clearance before they start making any changes. But once they got that part struck down, now we're back to where we were prior to 1965.
Mm-hmm.
So the states can set up, that's why we came up with this voter ID. That voter ID eliminated a number of people across the South particularly, because they did not have the proper documents to obtain a photo government issued ID. So it's right now we're still in a struggle to where we're trying to get the Congress to pass a bill to eliminate that voter ID, that government issued with a picture on it ID, because there's a number of people of color who was born, they had midwives that deliver them, and they don't have the proper documents, even though they are American citizens.
Yes.
But they don't have the proper documents to get their voter ID.
Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things, because what I'm hearing you saying is there have been a number of attempts over the years to suppress the right to vote, especially for, okay, so yes, we have an issue of the women's right to vote, in which, it took a long time for the United States to recognize that women had the right to vote. And then you also had the issues of the African American in terms of the right to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been a number of attempts to suppress voter registration. You mentioned some of them, but let's just expand upon that a little bit. You mentioned gerrymandering. What is that?
Gerrymandering, that's where they, every 10 years, they restructure the precincts, and they can put certain people in, for instance, the politicians, the ones in place, can claim their own territory, more or less, and they pick and choose what part of the population do they want in their district. And that happened every 10 years when they restructure the lines.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends who's in office would determine how they want to draw the lines. So like for instance, in Alabama, we have what they call the Black Belt. And that's congressional district number, I think it's number 7, where the district is drawn around most of the Selma, which is Dallas County, and all of it, part of the mid section of Alabama, what's considered the Black Belt. And it extends, it's got a little line that it extends up through parts of Birmingham. And what they did was put a large population of all the blacks into that one district. That way, it breaks up the power of the vote for when it comes to like African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
So they put them all into one district. So that's one way that they do a little bit of gerrymandering, and it makes it difficult for you to have a voice when you only got one district, when you could have possibly two, had they not structured the lines the way they did.
So this is interesting because in a previous episode, I spoke to somebody from the Census Bureau,
Mm-hmm.
and they were talking about the importance of filling out the census, especially in communities of color, because one of the census determines how much money or resources you get, but they also determines your level of representation. And so if you're not properly counting the number of people in a given area, if you're underreporting or undercounting, then you don't get the same type of ability to have full representation. And so what I'm hearing you saying is, between, unfortunately, individuals not filling out the census for whatever reason, and so underreporting, then it makes it easier to redistrict the way that politicians want to have greater, as you said, to put people in one area or one district, as opposed to them being able to be represented in two different districts.
Mm-hmm. And it also eliminates the amount of money that would come to them, because when they fill out the census, there's a certain amount of money that goes to each individual.
Mm-hmm.
And when they don't do that, when that person does not get counted, then that whole community will go lacking that funds for. And if you have a large number of people, you can imagine the revenue that it would cut down on for that community.
Yeah. So, okay, so we talked about gerrymandering. What are some of the other, I think you also talked about the voter ID in terms of ID restrictions or requirements,
Mm-hmm.
making it so onerous for individuals or difficult for individuals to prove who they are, mm-hmm. based on the certain type of documents that they're required to produce.
Mm-hmm. A form of voter suppression.
Mm-hmm.
Because when that person, say like one might have had a midwife to deliver them, and that midwife did not document it, and that person does not have a birth certificate.
Yes.
And that happened particularly in the early, I guess between in the early 90s up to the mid 60s or some thereabouts in certain areas. And you see all of these people are American citizens.
Yes.
But because they was delivered by a midwife, then they don't have the proper documentations to get that. And it was deliberate that this would be a form of voter suppression. And this is a strategy that the conservative has come up with.
Mm-hmm.
That if we can eliminate a certain amount of people, and particularly the African Americans, then, because one thing is that they know that the African Americans usually vote Democrat. And in order to eliminate that vote, then they come up with those restrictions and pretend that they're doing the best thing because they're trying to eliminate voter fraud. But it's not about voter fraud. It's more or less about voter suppression.
Okay. And I know another tactic in terms of voter suppression is disinformation, voter procedure disinformation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Misinformation. We had a case where one of the radio stations, a conservative radio talk host, was giving out misinformation, encouraging people that if you vote Democrat, then you need to come to vote on Wednesday.
Mm.
Well, that's misleading to a number of people. In any one, it's one too many. And he was passing that information on to the public that if you're going to vote in the Democratic Party, then you need to wait until Wednesday to come vote. Well, that's misinformation, and it was deliberate. And of course, I filed a complaint against him. But that's one form. And anytime they put out something that's misleading and it interrupt the voter turnout, that's misinformation that causes a person to not vote.
Yeah. So it could either be telling them to come and vote on the wrong day, or it could mean, sending out information saying, well, this particular precinct or this particular voting, area or polling station is closed when really it's open, or telling them, anything that prevents, as you said, the individual from exercising his or her given right to vote. It's a tactic to suppress voting.
Mm-hmm.
So now we also have like purging of voter rolls. What can you tell us about that?
Purging the voter roll, that's a process where they say, like, if you didn't vote for a certain amount of years, and they say like 3 elections went past and you didn't vote, even though you're registered, but you just didn't vote.
Mm-hmm.
Then they have a tendency sometimes to take the name off the list. Well, that's not right. And then also, one other way that they purge is that they send out a document for you to fill out, and then you don't fill it out. Then they take your name off the list because they say, well, we sent out this document and that person didn't fill out this information and send it back to us. So we're going to take their name off the list.
I guess claiming, maybe the person doesn't live there. They say they're supposed to live there, but they don't live there. And so based on that, they will, cage the list or purge the list.
And sometimes people not paying attention to the mail that comes in, they might get it and they look at it and say, oh, I'll fill it out tomorrow, and then lay it down. And tomorrow come, they forget about it. Well, and then the Board of Register can claim that, well, we sent them out this information and they didn't fill it out, so we're going to take their name off the list. And that's, a form of purging.
Mm-hmm. So you also mentioned the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit more about that. What did it do? And I know you were saying that there are some ways in which they have struck some of those provisions down. But tell us a little bit more about that.
One prime example was that poll tax. In order to register, you had to have, pay a poll tax. And sometimes people wasn't able to pay it. So that way they eliminate, when the 1901 Constitution, it had the poll tax, it eliminated a large number of people, and including a lot of white Americans was eliminated, and they voted for it because they couldn't pay the poll tax, which the 1965 Voting Rights Act eliminated that. And then it allowed for people of color to start participating in the process again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then too, not only was it poll tax, that was the Board of Register could come up with little games that they played, that they would, African American may come to register, and they said, well, have a jelly bean jar sitting on the table, said, tell us how many beans is in that jar there. And if they couldn't, who would be able to tell how many beans is in the jar?
Yeah.
And it was their way of saying that, well, he or she couldn't pass the test. So that way they could keep you from registering, because they could set up their own tactics tactics to do testing.
So it seems like individuals are going out, or politicians are going out of their way to suppress voting, to prevent groups of people from voting.
True. And it's happening today, because if you had paid, if one had paid attention to what our president is now saying, is that he don't want mail-in voting, because he knows that with coronavirus, a number of people don't want to stand in line to vote because they're concerned about their health. Well, he's trying to pretend that he don't want to have mail-in votes, because he says you can commit voter fraud, but there has been no evidence of that. Mm-hmm. And what his game plan is that if more people could mail in, then they would probably vote him out of the office. So he's trying to eliminate mail-in votes, because he have already said that if he could eliminate that, he would have a better chance of winning.
Yes, yeah. And it's ironic that a number of individuals in his cabinet have participated in mail-in voting.
Including him.
Absolutely, absolutely. So so we see the importance of voting. What is the so how does voting impact the community, and especially the African American community?
Oh, that way, when we vote, we are electing who will represent us. And if we're part of electing them, we can also go to them with our concerns and they will address them. But in a lot of cases in the African American community, where a number of our people does not go and vote, what they fail to realize is that someone will be put in a position to represent them, whether you vote for them or not. And in most cases, if you did not vote for them, because one thing politicians does, they don't tell it, but we know they do it from beginning. When they win an election and when they come into office, they take a look at who all voted and who did not vote. And when they start making decisions to benefit the community, they are favorable to the ones who put them in office, because they realize that if you put me in office, then you can take me out of the office. So they cater to the voting population. So when we as African Americans refuse to go and vote, what we don't realize is that a representative will be in a position to represent you, but they may not represent your interests when you go to them with your concerns, because they will know that, well, you're not a voting population, so I'm not concerned about you. My only concern is that I stay in office. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So they look to be reelected, and they know that if you're not voting, then you're no benefit to them.
So with the changing demographic of the United States in terms of the ratio of people of color to the Caucasian population, the white population, so to speak, you have a number of immigrants who come to the United States. Why is it, if you feel so, why is it important that they pursue citizenship?
Oh, it's good. Once they become a citizen, they can have a say-so as to who will represent them, and they can have a voice in government. But if they're not a citizen and they're not able to vote, then they are basically ignored by the politicians. When they address the needs of the community, they overlook that part. So that's why it's important that they become citizens, and that way they'll be able to cast a vote to help elect the representatives.
And so with that in mind, unfortunately, what we're seeing again from this present administration is putting limitations on citizenship, making it more difficult for people to become citizens, more challenging for people to become citizens, especially people from Latino or Hispanic countries,
Mhm.
who, as you said, generally would lean more towards the left than they would the right in terms of uh, Democrat than they would Republican. So if we can limit a large number of people who would become citizens, who therefore would be able to vote and therefore would be able to swing the election one way or another, then
Mhm.
that's another way of trying to suppress the vote and
Mhm.
manipulate the election.
Mhm.
So, so as we start to so we've looked at at what voting is, and we've looked at why it's important, and we've looked at the impact that it has on the African American community. So, what can we do to make sure that people are registered to vote and then actually go out and vote?
If we could make them understand the importance and how necessary it is for us all to vote. Right now, we have a president in office who won the election with, I think it was like 62 or 63 million votes. That's what put him in office. We had sitting on the sideline 102 or 103 million eligible people to vote who did not cast the vote for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a man in office that got into office with 62 million votes when we had 100 and something million people who did not vote. And that's, when people say my one vote don't matter, they're not the only one who's saying that. We had 100 million to say it this past presidential election.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
And so if we can vote, if you are eligible to vote and you don't vote, then you can't complain as to the state of how things are, especially if you are being underserved or underrepresented, because you had a chance to make a difference.
yes, you did. And let me get back to that presidential election from 2016. After that election was over, that president had the audacity to go around and he did a thank you to the African American population. Thank you for not voting. He said, because you not voting helped put me in office.
Mm, mm. Mercy, mercy. And we've seen the deleterious or the devastating effects of policies that have been implemented, executive orders that have been given by this administration towards the African American community, even with the protests of George Floyd, the murder of him, as well as Mr. Taylor. These and then the response from the African American community, but it's not just the African American community in terms of enough is enough, but yet in terms of instead of having a sympathizing view or attitude towards police brutality and towards racial injustice, this administration has a very different view and a very different tactic that it uses to address these issues.
True. And again, that's the only way to change it. And you asked earlier how to encourage people to go and vote. The only way that we can change those policies is by voting. That's why it's so important to the policies that's put in place are put there by the politician who's in office, and the politician is in office because of the voter turnout. And if we'll be a part of turning out politicians who will shape policies, like we can have police reform.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, okay, so we realize now, okay, we need to vote, and I'm not registered to vote yet. So, how can I go ahead and register to vote? And what are some of the deadlines as far as registering to vote? Understanding that my audience, the constituents that I serve, are
Mhm.
from Alabama, Kentucky, Mississippi, Tennessee, and the panhandles of Florida.
Mhm.
Are the dates the same, or are there different dates for different states?
They are different for different states. They are different. But in Alabama, because I'm not sure about the other states, but Alabama, we have a cutoff date. If you want to register to vote, you have a cutoff date of 14 days before that election is the cutoff. So you need to get your vote in before those 2 week period. And what was you asked me two questions? One was the
No, in
cutoff.
terms of voting, but also registering to vote.
Oh, okay, yeah. You need to if you're 18 years of age, or if you will be 18 on that election day, you can vote anytime leading up to that whatever election is taking place. And if it's a primary or if it's a general election, it's the cutoff is always 14 days before that election. And of course, normally our primaries will take place in March. I think it's around March 3rd, and the general elections normally take place in November, somewhere close to the second,
Hmm.
usually the second or the third.
So, how can I actually register to vote?
Okay, if you want to go online to register, you can go to alabama1.org. Oh, no, excuse me, alabamavote.org. That will take you to a website to where you can do a voter registration online. Or if you want to go to your nearest voter register in Huntsville, I don't know where most of them might, but in Huntsville, it's in Cook Avenue. Then also, if for people who are seeking employment, there's certain areas I know, like the post office, places where they have food stamps. I know they keep voter registration applications in those areas. It, so you can register in any one of those locations.
And then you have organizations such as, NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, who um, put on voter registration drives where they would go to certain communities, or whether it's a church or whether it's a community center, but areas in which there's a large population of individuals who may not have registered to vote, to encourage them to register to vote. And you would have registration materials there.
We do. We normally do leading up, well, throughout the year, we do voter registration, but in particular, leading up to an election, we select certain areas and we set up and we do voter registrations in their communities. And normally we put out flyers and we do public service announcements to encourage. We have a system that can identify the areas where we need to go into and work. And
Mhm.
normally we target those areas.
So, what does one generally need to vote? What identification or what documents do you need to be able to register to vote?
Oh, well, to register, you really doesn't need any documents. You need to know you need to be honest and just tell the truth as to whether you're 18 and you're an American citizen. But the documents is when you go to vote is when you need your documents. But to register, you can register without any documents.
And what documents do you need to vote?
To vote, you need a government issued photo ID. It can be a student ID. It can be an employee's ID if it's a government issue. You can be a military ID. It's got to have a picture on it, and it's got to be issued by the government, either the state or the federal.
Okay. So what opportunities are there for individuals who want to get involved in voter registration or the voting process, either to volunteer, or are there paid opportunities to encourage people to register and to actually vote?
Well, I'm not sure about paid opportunities, but I know all NAACP, if you have an NAACP office in your area, you can contact them, and it's not any pay involved in it. We all work for free. We get paid when we see a large turnout. That's pay enough. But NAACP, we have, in this community, we have the Alabama Democratic Conference. They do voter registration. We have the Democratic Women's. It's a large number of civic groups that does voter registration, and they would all be happy to have as much help if someone wanted to volunteer. I know they can call my office, and we'd be happy to have we need all the help we can get, because we have 9,000 and something unregistered African Americans living in the Madison County area.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what is your office number or contact?
Okay, that number is 256-858-1915. And if not there, you can leave a message and I will call them back shortly. Usually I call them back within the hour.
And this is the NAACP chapter of Madison County?
Yes, sir. That's the Madison County branch, NAACP. And Coach, we have a state branch. I mean, a state conference office that's located in Athens. And you can call that number. That's 256-444-1300. And they can direct you as to where any place in the state of Alabama to contact.
Okay. And so for those in other states like Mississippi, Kentucky, Tennessee, just look up your local NAACP office, where you can get information in terms of how you can register and how you can help.
Absolutely. If they go on the website and just pull up that, whatever state they're in, pull up that state conference, NAACP. If it's in Tennessee, they pull up the Tennessee State Conference, NAACP, and it will have a contact. Same thing in Mississippi. You pull up the Mississippi State Conference, NAACP, and you can find the contact for them.
So we've seen what voting is. We've seen the importance of voting, and we've discussed how we can vote. And some of we haven't necessarily talked about the deadlines for voting, but one can, look online to see the deadline for registering in your state. But the key is, number one, to make sure that you are registered, that every individual is registered. The second thing is to make sure that you vote. The third thing is to encourage as many people as possible to register to vote. The fourth thing is to encourage people to vote. And the fifth thing is, if there's anything that you can do to be able to carry people who may not have transportation on the day of the election, to get them to the voting poll. Those are 5 things that you can do. Make sure that you vote, that you're registered, make sure that you vote, encourage others to register, encourage others to go out to the voting poll. And those who are not able to travel or not able to go, have find a way to provide transportation for them to go. And we didn't mention about the absentee ballots, the importance of those. Yeah.
That's if you're going to be sick, or if you got a legitimate reason to where that you cannot make it to the polls on election day, you can apply for you can go online. Again, you go to alabamavote.org, and you can find download the registration form to fill out to get an absentee ballot. And the deadline for turning that in is the day of the election.
Okay.
You can either hand carry it or you can mail it.
Okay. Well, Jerry, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out to explain to us about voting, voter registration, and the importance of voting and registering to vote and encouraging people to vote, especially for the African American and Latino community. And so again, thank you for taking the time to be with us, and let's go out and vote.
Well, I want to thank you for having me, and appreciate you having me on your show.
Thanks for watching The Public Square. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please feel free to email me at pgoodridge@scc-sda.org. So, until next time, let's be good to each other, let's keep the conversation going, and I'll meet you again in the public square.